Katie Morrison stood at the edge of the excavation site and wiped sweat from her forehead. The red desert stretched endlessly across Kepler 442b, looking so much like Arizona that it made her homesick. She had spent 3 years studying xenoanthropology, preparing for alien encounters, but nothing had prepared her for what they found buried beneath this planet's surface. The scanner in her hand beeped steadily as she approached the massive metal doors jutting from the canyon wall. Captain Ben Hayes stood beside her, his face tight with concern. The doors were covered in symbols that made no sense, yet something about them felt disturbingly familiar. The survey team had been on Kepler 442b for 6 days when Lieutenant Maria Santos found the first anomaly. Her geological scanner detected hollow spaces beneath the desert, spaces too regular to be natural caves. Dr. Paul Chen ran every test he could think of, and his conclusion shook everyone on the Pathfinder. The structure below them was at least 10,000 years old, but it contained technology that shouldn't exist. More troubling, it contained organic signatures that matched human DNA exactly. Katie led the team into the facility after they cut through the doors. Emergency lighting flickered on as they entered, responding to their presence. The corridors were tall and wide, built for creatures much larger than humans. Strange devices lined the walls, humming with power despite their obvious age. Katie's heart pounded as they moved deeper into the complex. The air smelled sterile and cold, like a hospital that had been abandoned for centuries. Her team spread out, documenting everything with cameras and scanners. They found the first chamber 20 minutes into their exploration. The room was enormous, filled with hundreds of transparent pods arranged in neat rows. Each pod contained a person, suspended in some kind of stasis field that kept them frozen in time. Katie approached the nearest pod slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The woman inside wore clothing from Earth's past, a dress that looked like something from the 1800s. Her face was peaceful, as if she were merely sleeping. Katie moved to the next pod and found a man in Union Army uniform from the American Civil War. The next held a woman in pioneer clothing. Then she saw the children. 2 small figures lay in connected pods near the back of the chamber. They wore traditional Apache clothing, deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork. The boy appeared about 10 years old, the girl perhaps 8. Their faces were so young, so innocent that Katie felt tears sting her eyes. She called Dr. Chen over immediately, and he scanned the pods with shaking hands. His findings confirmed what Katie feared. These were real humans from Earth, taken from different time periods and brought across the stars to this alien facility. The technology keeping them alive was beyond anything humanity had created. Yet it was failing. Warning lights began flashing throughout the chamber. Dr. Chen's scanner showed cascade failures in the power systems. The pods were designed to last forever, but something had gone wrong. Katie watched in horror as the lights on several pods turned from green to amber. Captain Hayes ordered the team to retreat, to get back to the ship and report their findings. But Katie couldn't move. She stared at the 2 children, at their peaceful faces, and knew she couldn't leave them here. The amber lights turned red. Automated systems began emergency revival sequences, trying to wake the occupants before life support failed completely. The children's pods opened first. Mist poured out as the stasis fields collapsed. Katie rushed forward and caught the little girl as she fell forward, gasping and confused. The boy tumbled out next, his eyes wide with terror. He called out in a language Katie recognized from her studies. Apache. She had spent 6 months learning basic phrases from historical recordings, never imagining she would need them. She spoke softly to the children, using simple words to tell them they were safe. The girl clung to Katie's uniform, sobbing. The boy stood protectively beside his sister, trying to be brave even though his whole body trembled. More pods began opening throughout the chamber. Men and women from different eras stumbled out, crying and shouting in confusion. The facility systems couldn't handle the sudden power drain. Sparks flew from wall panels. The temperature in the room began rising rapidly. Katie lifted the little girl and grabbed the boy's hand, pulling them toward the exit. Captain Hayes was already evacuating the other survivors, his team moving efficiently through the chaos. Katie was almost to the door when she heard it. A deep groaning sound came from the facility's core, followed by an explosion that shook the entire structure. Fire erupted from the ventilation systems, but this was no ordinary fire. The flames burned in colors Katie had never seen, blues and purples mixing with orange and red. They moved wrong, spreading in directions that defied physics. Dr. Chen shouted that the temporal technology was destabilizing. The fire was burning through time itself, consuming past and future simultaneously. Katie ran harder, the children keeping pace beside her. They reached the main corridor and found it blocked by a wall of impossible flames. The boy pulled at Katie's arm, pointing to an alternate route. Katie didn't question how he knew the way. She followed his lead, trusting his instincts. They ran through passages that twisted and turned, the facility groaning around them. The little girl cried quietly against Katie's shoulder. Behind them, the fire roared closer, consuming everything in its path. Katie could feel the heat on her back, could smell her own hair singeing. They burst into another chamber and Katie's heart sank. It was a dead end. The children huddled behind Katie as she faced the flames. She activated her emergency beacon, hoping the team would find them in time. The fire reached the doorway, flames licking at the entrance. Katie pulled the children close and turned her back to the inferno, trying to shield them with her body. She whispered that everything would be okay, knowing it was a lie. The heat became unbearable. Katie closed her eyes and held the children tighter. Then strong hands grabbed her shoulders and yanked her backward with incredible force. A deep voice spoke in accented English, words that cut through her panic like a knife. "Run now. The spirit fire comes." Katie opened her eyes and saw him. A tall Apache warrior with painted face stood before her, his expression fierce and determined. He wore traditional clothing mixed with strange devices that glowed with alien technology. Without waiting for questions, he pulled Katie and the children away from the flames, moving with purpose through the collapsing facility. Katie ran after him, confused and terrified, but trusting this stranger who had appeared from nowhere. The warrior led them through passages she hadn't seen before, avoiding sections where the fire burned backward through time itself. They reached the surface just as the facility began imploding behind them. The desert air hit Katie's face like a blessing after the heat of the facility. She stumbled forward, still holding the little girl while the boy gripped her other hand. The Apache warrior who had saved them stood at the facility entrance, watching the flames consume everything inside. His chest heaved with exertion, but his stance remained proud and ready. Behind them, the Pathfinder's shuttle sat on a ridge 100 meters away. Captain Hayes was shouting into his communicator, trying to account for all team members. Katie counted heads quickly and her stomach dropped. 2 security officers were missing. Lieutenant Maria Santos appeared at Katie's side, her face covered in soot. She took one look at the children and immediately knelt beside them, speaking gently even though they couldn't understand her words. The little girl finally released her grip on Katie's uniform and allowed Maria to check her for injuries. The boy stood rigid, his eyes locked on the warrior who had saved them. Katie followed his gaze and really looked at their rescuer for the first time. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong features and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Scars marked his arms and chest, speaking of battles fought long ago. The devices attached to his clothing hummed softly, clearly alien technology he had adapted for his own use. Katie approached him carefully, her hands open and unthreatening. She spoke in Apache, using the formal greeting she had learned from old recordings. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, then he responded in the same language. His dialect was different from what she had studied, older and more complex, but she caught the essential meaning. He asked if she was a spirit woman or a dreamer. Katie switched to English, hoping he might understand. The warrior tilted his head, processing her words, then responded in careful English with a thick accent. He said his name was Running Hawk, that he was Warchief of his people before the star demons took him. He had been awake in this place for many sunrises, learning its secrets while the others slept. Dr. Chen rushed over, his scanner beeping wildly. He showed Katie the readings and her blood ran cold. The facility's collapse was creating a temporal shockwave that would reach the surface in less than 5 minutes. They needed to evacuate immediately. Captain Hayes ordered everyone back to the shuttle, but Katie saw the problem. More survivors were stumbling out of the facility, confused and terrified. Men in Civil War uniforms, women in pioneer dresses, and several more Native Americans from different tribes. They had no idea where they were or what was happening. Some were armed with period weapons and looked ready to fight. The situation could turn violent in seconds. Running Hawk moved before Katie could stop him. He strode toward the Native American survivors and began speaking in multiple languages, switching between Apache, Lakota, and Comanche dialects with ease. His voice carried authority and confidence. The survivors turned to him, drawn by his presence. Katie watched in amazement as he calmed them with just his words and bearing. He explained that they had been taken by enemies, that these new people were not their captors but had freed them from the sleeping prison. The children ran to him and he embraced them both, speaking softly in Apache. The little girl told him about the Star Woman who carried her through fire. The boy added that Katie had protected them with her own body. The ground shook violently. Dr. Chen screamed at everyone to run. The temporal shockwave was coming faster than his calculations predicted. Katie grabbed the children's hands and sprinted toward the shuttle. Running Hawk ran beside her, his long strides eating up the distance. Behind them, the facility imploded with a sound like reality itself tearing. Blue lightning erupted from the collapsing structure, reaching toward the sky. The shockwave hit just as they reached the shuttle ramp. Time seemed to skip and stutter. Katie saw Maria frozen mid-step, saw Captain Hayes' mouth moving but no sound emerging, saw the flames from the facility burning backward into the earth. Then everything snapped back to normal and they were inside the shuttle, the ramp closing behind them. The pilot launched immediately, fighting against turbulence from the temporal distortion. Katie strapped the children into seats, her hands shaking with adrenaline. Running Hawk stood near the viewport, refusing to sit despite Maria's insistence. He watched the planet fall away beneath them, his expression unreadable. The other survivors huddled together in small groups, speaking in frightened whispers. The Civil War soldiers eyed each other warily, old enemies finding themselves in the same impossible situation. The pioneer women comforted each other, some praying quietly. The Pathfinder came into view, a sleek exploration vessel hanging in orbit like a silver needle against the stars. The shuttle docked smoothly, and the crew began the evacuation process. Medical teams waited in the hangar bay, ready to assess the survivors. Katie led the children through the airlock, speaking to them softly in her limited Apache. Running Hawk followed close behind, his eyes taking in every detail of the ship's interior. She saw him analyzing the technology around them, understanding more than he should have been able to. This was not a primitive man overwhelmed by strange magic. This was an intelligent warrior adapting rapidly to new circumstances. Captain Hayes met them in the hangar. His face was gray with stress and exhaustion. He told Katie that the facility was completely destroyed, erased from existence by the temporal collapse. Nothing remained but a crater filled with impossible energies that would take years to dissipate. Whatever secrets the alien structure had held were gone forever. Except for the survivors, 43 humans pulled from Earth's history now stood aboard a starship, displaced in time and space by thousands of years and light years. Katie asked what would happen to them, and the captain had no answer. Dr. Chen approached with disturbing news. His analysis of the facility's remaining data suggested it was part of a much larger operation. The aliens who built it, the ones Running Hawk called star demons, had been collecting humans for thousands of years. This was just one storage site among many. The implications made Katie sick. How many people had been stolen from Earth's past? How many remained in stasis on other worlds? And why were aliens so interested in humans that they would harvest them across centuries? The little girl tugged on Katie's sleeve. Through gestures and simple words, Katie understood that the child needed food and water. She led both children to the mess hall, with Running Hawk following silently. The automated systems confused the Apache warrior at first, but he watched Katie demonstrate how to get food and quickly mastered the process. He selected items carefully, testing each before giving any to the children. Katie recognized his caution. He was protecting his people, making sure nothing would harm them. She respected that deeply. While the children ate, Katie tried to explain their situation using simple words and hand gestures. They were far from Earth, traveling between stars. The facility had been a prison that held them sleeping for many years. The people of this ship had freed them. Running Hawk listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed his sharp intelligence. He wanted to know about the star demons, about why they took his people. Katie shared what little they knew. The aliens seemed to collect species from across the galaxy, studying them for unknown purposes. Humans were apparently particularly interesting to them. Running Hawk's jaw tightened with anger. He said his people had stories of spirit stealers, beings who came in lights from the sky and took the bravest warriors. The elders claimed these stolen ones went to fight in the Sky Wars. Katie felt chills run down her spine. How long had these aliens been harvesting humans? How much of Earth's mythology was based on real alien contact? The questions multiplied faster than answers could form. The mess hall doors opened and Captain Hayes entered with Lieutenant Maria Santos. They needed to discuss what to do with the survivors. Medical had confirmed that all 43 were in perfect health, preserved exactly as they had been when taken. But they were displaced persons with nowhere to go. Returning them to Earth meant explaining the unexplainable. Keeping them aboard violated first contact protocols, even though they were technically humans. Katie argued that these people deserved a choice in their own fate. They had been stolen, imprisoned, and nearly killed. The least humanity could do was give them agency. Running Hawk stood and spoke directly to Captain Hayes in his careful English. He said his people were warriors who adapted to survive. They had faced enemies before and learned to defeat them. If the star demons wanted to study humans, they would learn that humans were not prey to be collected. They were predators who fought back. Running Hawk sat in the observation deck and watched the stars move past the viewport. Katie sat beside him with a translation device that helped bridge the gaps in their language. The children slept nearby on padded benches, finally exhausted enough to rest. The warrior had spent the last 3 hours answering questions about his time in the facility. His story painted a terrifying picture of the aliens Katie now knew were called collectors. Running Hawk had been taken during a raid against Mexican soldiers in 1886. One moment he was fighting on a rocky hillside. The next he woke in a pod surrounded by strange lights and sounds. But unlike the others, something had gone wrong with his suspension. He had awakened while the facility's caretakers were still present. The collectors were tall creatures with thin bodies and large heads, he explained. They moved slowly and seemed weak, relying on machines to do everything for them. Running Hawk had pretended to still be asleep, watching them through barely opened eyes. He learned their patterns, memorized their movements, and waited for his moment. When the caretakers left the chamber unattended, he broke free of his pod and hid in the facility's vast corridors. For weeks he survived by stealing food from storage areas and avoiding the few collectors that remained. He found tools and weapons in their laboratories and learned to use the alien devices by careful observation and experimentation. Katie listened with growing amazement. Running Hawk described adapting to zero-gravity training chambers, figuring out how energy weapons worked, and even accessing the collectors' computer systems through visual interfaces. He couldn't read their language, but he understood symbols and patterns. He discovered that the facility held thousands of humans from across Earth's history. The collectors were studying human adaptability, trying to understand how one species could survive in so many different environments and time periods. They found humans fascinating because, unlike most species they encountered, humans were aggressive, creative, and emotionally complex. The collectors had been harvesting humans for over 10,000 years. Running Hawk had searched the facility for weeks, looking for a way to free his people. He found the children first and learned they were siblings taken from a village raid. He wanted to wake them but feared the collectors would recapture them all if he acted too soon. Then the power systems began failing. The collectors evacuated in a panic, leaving their collection behind. Running Hawk knew the facility would collapse eventually. He stayed near the children's pods, determined to save them when the time came. When Katie's team arrived, he watched from hiding to understand their intentions. When the fire started and Katie ran back for the children, he knew she was someone who could be trusted. Captain Hayes joined them in the observation deck with Dr. Chen. The physicist had completed his analysis of the facility's data core before it exploded. What he found changed everything. The collectors weren't just scientists conducting research. They were preparing for war. The data showed plans to create hybrid soldiers using human DNA, combining human aggression and adaptability with advanced technology. They had been testing humans in combat simulations, measuring their tactical abilities and psychological resilience. The war was against another species called the Dissolvers, aggressive beings that consumed entire planets. The collectors believed that human traits might be the key to winning. Running Hawk absorbed this information with a warrior's understanding. He asked the right questions about enemy numbers, technology, and tactics. Dr. Chen was impressed by how quickly the Apache Warchief grasped complex strategic concepts. Running Hawk noted that the collectors were cowards who stole others to fight their battles. True warriors face their enemies directly. Katie agreed but pointed out that 43 displaced humans couldn't stop an interstellar war. Running Hawk smiled grimly and said 43 warriors who refused to give up were more dangerous than 1,000 who fought because they were forced to. The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Maria Santos rushing in with urgent news. 3 collector ships had appeared at the system's edge and were approaching rapidly. They were broadcasting demands in multiple languages, including English. They wanted their specimens returned immediately. Captain Hayes ordered battle stations and the Pathfinder's crew scrambled to defensive positions. The exploration vessel wasn't designed for combat, but it carried enough weapons to defend itself. Hayes told Katie to secure the survivors in the cargo bay where they would be safest. She gathered Running Hawk and the children quickly, explaining the danger. The survivors reacted with fear and anger when Katie told them the collectors had returned. The Civil War soldiers immediately demanded weapons. The pioneer women began organizing a defensive position instinctively. The Native American warriors gathered around Running Hawk, looking to him for leadership. Katie was struck by how quickly these people adapted to crisis. They had survived wars, disasters, and hardship in their own times. Being displaced to the future hadn't changed their fundamental nature. They were survivors who fought back when threatened. Running Hawk spoke to the assembled group in multiple languages, with Katie translating where needed. He told them about the collectors, about what they had done and what they planned. He explained that they were aboard a ship called Pathfinder, that the crew were humans from the far future who had freed them. Now the enemy returned to reclaim their prisoners. The survivors could hide and hope the ship's crew protected them, or they could stand and fight for their freedom. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every person in that cargo bay wanted to fight. Captain Hayes refused the request at first. These were displaced persons under his protection, not soldiers. He couldn't arm civilians and send them into combat against alien invaders, but Running Hawk made a compelling argument through Katie. They weren't civilians. They were warriors, soldiers, and survivors who had faced death before. More importantly, they understood something the Pathfinder's crew didn't. The collectors were physically weak and relied completely on technology. In close combat, they would be helpless. Hayes listened but remained skeptical until Dr. Chen showed him the scans. The physicist had analyzed the collectors' biology from the facility's data. They evolved on a low-gravity world and had hollow bones like birds. Their muscle mass was minimal and their reaction times were slow. They compensated with advanced weapons and armor, but they had never developed for physical combat. Dr. Chen theorized that most species they encountered were similarly peaceful or weak. They had never faced warriors who excelled at close quarters fighting. Running Hawk suggested letting humans do what humans did best. Fight dirty, fight close, and fight with absolute determination. Katie found herself supporting the plan despite her reservations. These people deserved agency over their own lives. They had been stolen, imprisoned, and studied like animals. Giving them weapons and letting them fight back was giving them their dignity. Lieutenant Maria Santos volunteered to train the survivors in basic zero-gravity movement and modern weapons. She spent 2 hours in the cargo bay teaching warriors from the 1800s how to use energy rifles and magnetic boots. Most struggled with the equipment, but Running Hawk mastered everything within minutes. His ability to adapt was remarkable. The children stayed with Katie while the adults prepared for battle. The little girl asked through simple words and gestures if the bad spirits were coming back. Katie knelt and promised that she would not let anyone take them again. The boy, trying to be brave, said he wanted to fight too. Katie explained gently that warriors needed to protect the weak and helpless. The children's job was to guard the medical bay where injured fighters would need help. The boy accepted this with solemn dignity, understanding that he was being given an important responsibility. The collector ships entered weapons range and opened fire. The Pathfinder's shields held but barely. Captain Hayes tried negotiating, but the collectors refused to listen. They considered humans their property under ancient salvage laws. They would take their specimens by force if necessary. Hayes made his decision. He authorized the boarding action. Lieutenant Maria Santos would lead a combined team of security officers and volunteer survivors. Their mission was to board the lead collector ship and disable its weapons. Running Hawk would command the historical fighters with Katie serving as translator and coordinator. The plan was insane and everyone knew it. They were sending people with no spaceflight experience to board an alien warship, using tactics that were 200 years obsolete. But sometimes the craziest plans worked because the enemy never anticipated them. The collectors expected humans to rely on technology to fight from a distance. They didn't expect humans to close with them personally. The boarding teams assembled in the shuttle bay, an unlikely combination of future soldiers and past warriors. Running Hawk painted his face with war markings using pigments Maria provided. The other Native American warriors did the same. The Civil War soldiers checked their period rifles that had been modified with modern ammunition. Everyone carried knives as backup weapons. Katie suited up in light armor and checked her equipment one last time. She caught Running Hawk watching her and saw approval in his eyes. He said something in Apache that she didn't quite catch. The interior of the collector ship was nothing like Katie expected. The corridors were massive and dimly lit with bioluminescent panels that pulsed with sickly green light. The gravity was weaker than Earth normal, making every step feel bouncy and strange. Running Hawk adapted immediately, using the low gravity to move faster and jump higher. The other warriors struggled at first, but learned quickly. Katie followed Maria's team as they advanced toward the ship's command center, using hand signals to coordinate with Running Hawk's group. They encountered the first collectors at an intersection. 3 of the aliens stood monitoring a console, their elongated fingers dancing over holographic displays. They were even more disturbing in person than Running Hawk had described. Nearly 8 feet tall but thin as skeletons with gray skin that seemed almost translucent. Their heads were disproportionately large with huge black eyes that showed no emotion. They wore shimmering armor that covered their fragile bodies. When they saw the boarding party, they reached for weapons mounted on their belts. Maria fired first. The energy bolt hit the lead collector center mass and the alien crumpled instantly. The armor absorbed some damage but couldn't stop the weapons Maria's team carried. The other 2 collectors tried to flee, but Running Hawk's warriors were faster. The Apache Warchief closed the distance in 3 powerful bounds and slammed into the nearest alien with his shoulder. The collector went down hard and didn't get up. Its armor had protected it from energy weapons, but offered no defense against simple kinetic force. The third collector managed to fire a weapon that shot nets of some kind of energy. One of Running Hawk's warriors got tangled, but the others closed in with knives. The collector fell within seconds. Katie stared at the bodies in shock. The collectors looked terrifying, but they were incredibly fragile. Running Hawk had been right. These beings had no experience with physical combat. They had evolved to rely on technology for everything, including defense. Humans, who had spent millions of years as both predators and prey, had instincts and abilities the collectors lacked completely. Maria ordered the team forward before alarm could be raised. They needed to reach the bridge quickly. More collectors appeared as they advanced deeper into the ship. Each encounter ended the same way. The aliens tried to use their advanced weapons, but humans were faster, more aggressive, and far more willing to get close and personal. The Civil War soldiers fought with shocking efficiency, moving in coordinated firing lines that trapped collectors in crossfire. The Native American warriors used the low gravity to leap and strike from unexpected angles. The Pathfinder security team provided covering fire and tactical coordination. Katie found herself acting as combat translator, passing information between groups who spoke different languages. They reached the bridge in under 10 minutes. The door was sealed, but one of the Civil War soldiers, a former demolition expert, placed charges that blew it open. The bridge was enormous, filled with alien technology Katie couldn't begin to understand. A dozen collectors worked at various stations, their fingers flying over controls in panic. The commander was obvious, a larger collector wearing more elaborate armor. It turned to face the boarders and spoke through a translation device. Its voice was cold and mechanical. It demanded the humans surrender and return to their pods. The specimens were property of the collective and would be retrieved. Running, Hawk responded by putting an energy bolt through the commander's shoulder. The alien shrieked and collapsed. The other collectors froze, clearly not programmed to handle direct violence. Maria ordered them to power down all weapon systems immediately. When they hesitated, Running Hawk's warriors advanced with knives drawn. The collectors complied quickly, their thin fingers shaking as they entered commands. Katie felt sick watching but understood the necessity. These aliens had stolen thousands of humans across centuries. They needed to understand that humans were not helpless victims. Lieutenant Maria Santos secured the bridge while Katie tried to access the ship's computers. The interface was completely alien, but Dr. Chen had given her some basic guidance based on the facility's systems. She managed to pull up what looked like ship manifests, and her breath caught. This vessel alone held over 3,000 humans in stasis pods. Men, women, and children from dozens of different time periods and cultures. Ancient Romans, medieval knights, indigenous peoples from every continent, victims from wars and disasters throughout history. The collectors had been systematically harvesting humans for thousands of years. Running Hawk looked over her shoulder and saw the numbers. His face hardened with rage. He demanded to know where the sleeping people were kept. Katie found deck plans and located the storage bays. They were 3 levels down, massive chambers filled with row after row of pods. Running Hawk immediately wanted to free them all, but Katie explained the danger. Waking that many people at once would cause panic and chaos. They needed a plan. Maria agreed and contacted Captain Hayes to report their situation. The captain's response was terse. The other 2 collector ships were retreating but sending distress calls. They had maybe 30 minutes before reinforcements arrived. Dr. Chen's voice came over the comm channel with urgent news. He had accessed the collector network through the captured bridge. What he found was devastating. There were over 200 collector vessels spread across the galaxy, each one holding thousands of human specimens. The total number was estimated at nearly 500,000 people taken from Earth over 10 millennia. The collectors had been breeding some humans in captivity for generations, creating bloodlines they considered particularly valuable. They had been trading human specimens with other alien species. Humanity's reputation across the stars was built on the backs of these stolen ancestors. Katie felt rage like she had never known. These aliens had committed crimes beyond measure. They had stolen people from their lives and families, had experimented on them, had treated them like livestock. The collectors on the bridge cowered as they sensed the humans' fury. One of them spoke through its translator, trying to justify their actions. It claimed humans were classified as uncontacted primitives when they began collecting. By galactic law, primitives could be studied and preserved by advanced species. Humans were particularly valuable because of their unique traits. The collector insisted they had done nothing wrong. Running Hawk moved before anyone could stop him. He grabbed the speaking collector by its thin neck and lifted it off the ground with one hand. His voice was quiet but terrible when he spoke. He told the alien that his people had a saying, "A warrior who steals children is not a warrior at all. He is a coward who deserves no mercy." Katie translated automatically, her own anger making her voice harsh. The collector struggled weakly in Running Hawk's grip, its large eyes showing what might have been fear. Running Hawk released it with disgust, and it collapsed to the deck, gasping. Captain Hayes broke the tension by ordering evacuation. They had accomplished their mission and captured a collector ship intact, but they couldn't hold it against reinforcements. Maria began organizing the retreat, but Katie had a different idea. She proposed they take the ship instead of destroying it. It held 3,000 humans who deserved freedom. More importantly, the ship's computers contained information about every collector vessel and facility. They could find where all the other stolen humans were held. Hayes was reluctant, but Dr. Chen supported the plan. The Pathfinder's AI could interface with the collector systems. They could pilot the ship remotely. Running Hawk gathered his warriors and explained the new objective. They needed to hold the bridge until the Pathfinder could establish control. His people responded with fierce determination. The Civil War soldiers set up defensive positions at all entrances. The Native American warriors patrolled the corridors, securing key systems. Katie worked frantically at the command console, trying to give Dr. Chen access to ship functions. The collectors huddled in a corner of the bridge, defeated and terrified. They kept muttering among themselves, their translator devices picking up fragments. They talked about humans being more dangerous than the combat simulations predicted. They called humans Deathworlders, a term Katie didn't understand. Dr. Chen explained over the comm that Deathworlder was galactic slang for species from high-gravity planets with dangerous ecosystems. Such species developed strength, aggression, and survival instincts that made them formidable. Most galactic civilization species came from gentle worlds and found death worlders frightening. Apparently, humans were considered an extreme example. Earth's gravity, its abundance of predators, its diseases and disasters had forged humanity into something most aliens feared. The collectors had been studying humans for thousands of years but had never actually fought them. Their research was clinical and distant. Now they understood why death worlders were usually avoided. The ship suddenly lurched as the Pathfinder's AI took control. Dr. Chen reported success. He could pilot the collector vessel remotely. Captain Hayes ordered both ships to jump to a safe location before reinforcements arrived. Katie felt the strange sensation of faster-than-light travel as reality bent around them. When it stabilized, they were in an empty star system far from the collector's territory. The Pathfinder moved alongside. The council chamber aboard the Pathfinder was crowded with people who should never have been in the same room together. Captain Hayes sat at the head of the table with his senior officers. Katie sat to his right with Running Hawk beside her. Around the table were representatives from the rescued humans. A Union captain named Gregory sat next to a Confederate sergeant named Lucas. Both men had agreed to set aside their war for this meeting. A pioneer woman named Ruth represented the civilian survivors. 3 Native American warriors from different tribes sat together, united by Running Hawk's leadership. Dr. Chen stood near a display screen showing data from the captured collector ship. Captain Hayes opened the meeting by explaining their situation. They had rescued 3,000 humans from the collector ship, but the problem was enormous. The ship's database showed locations of 200 more collector vessels, holding nearly 500,000 humans total. Some had been in stasis for thousands of years. Others were taken just decades ago. The collector's network extended across multiple star systems, and they had allies among other alien species. Fighting them would require resources the Pathfinder didn't have. More immediately, they needed to decide what to do with the 3,000 people in the storage bays below. Dr. Chen presented 3 options. First, they could return everyone to present-day Earth. The 24th century had resources to integrate displaced persons, but it would be difficult for people from the past to adapt. Second, they could attempt temporal repatriation using collector technology to send people back to their original time periods. This risked creating paradoxes that might damage the timeline. Third, they could find a suitable planet and establish a colony where the displaced humans could build a new society together. Each option had serious problems. Running Hawk stood and spoke in his careful English. He said the council was asking the wrong question. They were treating the sleeping ones as a problem to solve when they should be asking what those people wanted. He suggested waking representatives from different time periods and letting them speak for themselves. Captain Hayes worried about the chaos of waking thousands of confused people, but Katie supported Running Hawk's point. These were humans with their own agency. They deserved a voice in decisions about their future. The compromise was to wake 50 people from different eras and backgrounds. Medical teams spent 6 hours carefully reviving individuals and preparing them for the shock of their situation. Katie worked with translators and historians to ease the transitions. A Roman centurion woke believing he had died in battle and reached the afterlife. A medieval peasant woman thought she was experiencing religious visions. A Lakota warrior from the 1700s assumed he was in a spirit journey. Each person required patient explanation and time to process impossible truths. Running Hawk proved invaluable, using his own experience to help others understand. By evening ship time, 50 confused and frightened people gathered in the main assembly hall. Katie stood before them with Running Hawk beside her and tried to explain what had happened. She spoke slowly and clearly while translators converted her words into dozens of languages. She told them about the collectors, about being stolen from Earth and frozen in time. She explained that they were aboard a ship traveling between stars, that centuries or millennia had passed since they were taken. She watched faces cycle through disbelief, horror, anger, and grief. Some people wept. Others shouted demands or prayers. A few sat in stunned silence. Running Hawk raised his hand and the room quieted. Something about his presence commanded respect across all cultures and eras. He told his own story, how he was taken from battle and imprisoned in the sleeping death, how he woke alone in a strange place and survived by adapting, how he found others like him and swore to free them. He spoke of Katie, the star woman who ran through fire to save children she didn't know. He told them about the battle to capture this ship and free them all. His words were simple but powerful. By the time he finished, the fear in the room had transformed into something else. Determination. A woman stood up, introducing herself as Helen from ancient Greece. She had been a merchant's wife before her capture. She asked the question everyone wanted answered. Could they go home? Dr. Chen stepped forward to explain the temporal mechanics. Returning people to their exact time periods was theoretically possible, but extremely dangerous. Every change to the past created ripples that could alter the present. Taking someone out of history and then putting them back might seem neutral, but memories and experiences gained during captivity could change their actions. Those changes could compound over centuries. The risk was too high. Gregory, the Union captain, asked about staying in the present. Dr. Chen explained that Earth in the 24th century was very different from anything they knew. Technology was advanced beyond magic. Society had changed in ways they couldn't imagine. Languages evolved. Cultures transformed or disappeared. They would be strangers in a strange land, dependent on others for basic survival. Some people could adapt, but many would struggle. There would be no going back to farms or simple lives they understood. The modern world was complex and overwhelming. Ruth, the pioneer woman, asked about the third option. Could they really just start over on a new planet? Captain Hayes confirmed it was possible. The galaxy had millions of habitable worlds. They could find one with Earth-like conditions and establish a colony. The Pathfinder could provide initial technology and supplies, but building a civilization from scratch would be incredibly hard. They would need to farm, hunt, build, and defend themselves with limited support. Many people would die in the early years. It would be like the old American frontier, but harder because they would be completely alone. The assembly erupted in debate. Different groups argued for different solutions. The Roman centurion insisted on returning to his own time regardless of risk because honor demanded it. Helen argued for staying in the present where they could live in peace. Ruth wanted the colony option, saying pioneers knew how to survive through hardship. The Native American warriors gathered around Running Hawk, speaking in low voices. Katie watched the Warchief listen carefully to each person before responding. Whatever he said calmed them and brought nods of agreement. Running Hawk raised his hand again and the room fell silent. He said he had heard everyone speak and understood their fears and hopes. He proposed a fourth option that Dr. Chen had not mentioned. They could use the collector technology not to return to their exact time periods, but to travel to Earth's distant past, before modern humans existed. They could establish a settlement on Earth itself, during a time when they wouldn't interfere with history. They would be ancestors to all of humanity rather than displaced persons. Their settlement could grow naturally across thousands of years, eventually becoming part of Earth's normal history. Dr. Chen looked stunned. He ran calculations rapidly on his datapad. The idea was brilliant and insane. Going back millions of years to early Earth would avoid any temporal paradoxes. The settlement would have time to develop naturally without interfering with human evolution. Any archaeological traces would be so old they would seem like mysterious anomalies rather than proof of time travel. The mathematics worked, but there was one huge problem. The people who chose this option would never see the results. They would spend their entire lives building something their descendants might achieve in millennia. It was an act of faith across time itself. The room was quiet as people processed this. A medieval monk stood and said it sounded like Noah building the ark. You didn't build it because you would see the flood end. You built it to save others, Ruth agreed, saying pioneers always planted trees they would never see grow tall. The work was for children and grandchildren. Running Hawk added that warriors fought battles they might not survive so their people could live. Sacrifice for the future was what made humans human. Katie felt tears in her eyes. These people from across history understood something profound about their shared nature. Gregory asked the practical questions. Where would they settle? What would they need? How would different time periods work together? Captain Hayes and Dr. Chen presented proposals. Earth's moon in the distant past would be ideal. It had lower gravity, which some might find difficult, but it was close to Earth and offered protection from many dangers. They could establish underground habitats using collector technology, creating a sustainable environment. Food could be grown in hydroponic systems. The colony would have access to basic technology, but nothing too advanced. The goal was to give them tools to survive and let them develop naturally from there. Running Hawk asked who would lead such a place. People from different times had different ideas about leadership. Romans expected emperors. Native Americans valued councils. Pioneers believed in elected representatives. How would they govern themselves? Katie suggested they create a council with representatives from each time period and culture. The council would make decisions together, respecting all voices. Running Hawk approved, saying his people had always used councils for important decisions. Gregory and Lucas, the Union and Confederate soldiers, agreed that voting was the American way. Even the Roman centurion admitted that the Senate had value when it worked properly. Katie walked through the storage bays of the collector ship 3 weeks after the council meeting and marveled at the transformation. What had been a prison holding unconscious humans was now a bustling community preparing for their journey. People from dozens of eras worked together, learning from each other and planning their future. A Roman centurion taught medieval peasants about organization and discipline. Pioneer women shared food preservation techniques with ancient Greeks. Native American warriors showed Civil War soldiers how to hunt and track. The barriers of time and culture were breaking down as people discovered their shared humanity. Running Hawk had emerged as the natural leader of the colony project. He moved through the groups daily, listening to concerns and mediating disputes. His ability to see connections between different cultures was remarkable. When Romans and Native Americans argued about leadership structures, he found common ground in their warrior traditions. When religious groups clashed over beliefs, he reminded them that all faiths taught respect and community. Katie worked beside him as translator and cultural advisor, amazed by his diplomatic skills. The man was adapting to leadership on a scale far beyond tribal warfare. Dr. Chen spent his days preparing the collector ship for its final mission. The vessel would carry the colonists back 2 million years to Earth's moon. Once there, they would establish underground habitats using the ship's technology. The ship itself would be dismantled and its materials used to build the settlement. Chen programmed careful limits into what technology the colonists could keep. They would have environmental systems, basic medical equipment and farming tools, but no advanced weapons, no computers, and no way to contact the future. The colony needed to develop naturally without becoming dependent on technology they couldn't maintain or understand. Lieutenant Maria Santos trained security volunteers from among the colonists. She focused on practical skills like perimeter defense, emergency response, and conflict resolution. The volunteers were mostly warriors and soldiers from various eras who understood discipline and duty. Maria was impressed by how quickly they learned. These people had lived through real wars and hardships. They took training seriously because they knew survival depended on it. She taught them to work together despite language barriers, using hand signals and demonstrations that transcended words. Katie found the children, Little Star and Swift Fox, in a makeshift school where volunteers taught basic skills. The little girl was learning to write while the boy practiced mathematics. Running Hawk believed strongly that all children in the colony should be educated regardless of background. In his own time, Apache children learned through observation and experience. Now he saw value in written knowledge too. Katie sat with the children during their break, and they showed her drawings they had made. Little Star drew a picture of Katie surrounded by flames, holding 2 small figures. The boy drew the Pathfinder flying among stars. The question of what to do about the other collector ships haunted Captain Hayes and his crew. They had freed 1 ship's worth of humans, but hundreds of thousands remained in captivity across the galaxy. Hayes wanted to mount a rescue operation, but the Pathfinder was a single exploration vessel. Fighting an interstellar organization would require military resources they didn't have. He sent reports to Earth Command explaining the situation and requesting assistance. The response was slow in coming. Earth was still debating how to handle the situation without starting a galactic war. Running Hawk approached Katie with an idea that changed everything. He suggested they use the collector ship itself as a weapon against the collectors. The vessel had extensive databases showing locations of every other collector facility and ship. It also had security codes and access protocols. A small team could use this information to infiltrate other facilities and free more prisoners. Katie brought the idea to Captain Hayes, and he was intrigued but concerned. Sending teams deep into collector territory was incredibly dangerous. They would need volunteers willing to risk their lives for strangers they had never met. The response from the colonists was overwhelming. Nearly 100 people volunteered immediately. Warriors from every era stepped forward, along with pioneers who had faced frontier dangers, and even some civilians who simply couldn't accept leaving others in captivity. Running Hawk insisted on leading the mission himself. Katie argued that he was needed to lead the colony, but the war chief was firm. He had been a prisoner in that facility and knew the fear of sleeping while life passed by. He couldn't enjoy freedom knowing others suffered the same fate. Captain Hayes selected 20 volunteers to join Running Hawk, including Lieutenant Maria Santos, who refused to let him go without proper military support. Katie spent the next week working with the team to plan their infiltration. The collector database showed a facility on a planet called Arcturus Prime that held over 10,000 humans. The facility was older than the one where Katie's team found Running Hawk, which meant its security systems might be outdated. More importantly, it was a research center rather than a military base. The collectors there would be scientists focused on their studies, not soldiers prepared for combat. The plan was to use the captured ship's codes to approach without raising alarms, then board and disable security before freeing the prisoners. The little girl cried when she learned Running Hawk was leaving. She clung to him and begged him not to go in her limited English. The war chief knelt and spoke gently in Apache. Katie translated for the others watching. He told Little Star that a warrior's duty was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. There were children like her still sleeping in the bad places, waiting for someone to wake them. He had to go because he couldn't rest, knowing they were afraid. The girl understood but still cried. Her brother stood tall and said when he grew up he would be a warrior like Running Hawk who saved others. The war chief embraced both children and promised to return. The infiltration team departed on the captured collector ship while the Pathfinder stayed to protect the colonists. Katie went with them as cultural specialist and translator. Captain Hayes approved reluctantly, knowing her skills would be essential when dealing with rescued humans from various eras. The journey to Arcturus Prime took 10 days through faster than light travel. During that time, Katie got to know the volunteers better. She was moved by their courage and their reasons for coming. A medieval knight wanted to rescue others because no one had rescued him. A pioneer woman had lost her children to illness and saw the imprisoned humans as children who needed a mother. A Lakota warrior simply said it was the right thing to do. Running Hawk spent the journey teaching Katie more Apache language and customs. He spoke about his life before the collectors took him, about his wife and son who he would never see again. They would be dust now, their names forgotten except by him. But he didn't speak with bitterness. He said every warrior knew they might die far from home. What mattered was that their actions meant something. Freeing thousands of imprisoned humans gave his displacement purpose. Katie understood then why people followed him. Running Hawk didn't lead through force or charisma. He led by embodying the principles he taught. They reached Arcturus Prime and used the captured ship's codes to approach the collector facility. The deception worked perfectly. The facility's automated systems recognized the ship as friendly and granted docking permission. Maria led the team through the airlock with weapons ready, but they encountered no resistance. The facility was exactly as the database described, a research center staffed by scientist collectors focused on their work. The infiltration team moved quickly through corridors, disabling security and locking collectors in their laboratories. Within an hour, they controlled the entire facility. Katie descended to the storage levels with Running Hawk and saw row after row of stasis pods stretching into darkness. The scale was staggering. 10,000 humans suspended in time, their faces peaceful, but their lives stolen. Running Hawk walked among the pods with an expression Katie couldn't read. He stopped at one holding a woman in Aztec clothing, her jewelry suggesting high status. At another, he paused to look at a Viking warrior with elaborate tattoos. At a third, he studied a man in ancient Egyptian garments who might have been a priest or scholar. These weren't just numbers. They were individuals with stories and dreams and families who mourned them. Maria contacted the team with urgent news. She had accessed the facility's computers and found something horrifying. The collectors weren't just studying humans for scientific interest. They were selling them. The facility's record showed transactions with dozens of alien species across the galaxy. Some bought humans as curiosities to display. Others wanted workers for dangerous tasks. A few purchased humans for reasons the translator couldn't properly convey but sounded like entertainment. Humanity's reputation across the stars was built on the slave trade of stolen ancestors. Katie felt sick reading the reports. Running Hawk made a decision that defined his character. He ordered the team to free every human in the facility, regardless of what it meant for their own escape. Maria protested that waking 10,000 confused people would take days and attract collector reinforcements. They should take what they could carry and destroy the rest. The Pathfinder orbited Earth's moon exactly 2 million years before Katie, Morrison, was born. Dr. Chen had spent weeks calculating the precise moment in history that would allow the colony to develop without causing temporal paradoxes. Below them, the moon's gray surface stretched endlessly, marked by ancient craters that would still exist in Katie's time. Earth hung in the black sky like a blue jewel, its continents shaped differently than any map Katie knew. Early hominids were just beginning to walk upright down there, completely unaware that their distant descendants were about to establish a settlement above them. The colony ship, no longer called by its collector designation, but now named Hope's Journey by vote of its passengers, descended toward a crater selected for the settlement. The location offered natural protection from radiation and meteors, while staying close enough to the surface for eventual expansion. Katie watched from the command deck as Running Hawk stood beside Captain Hayes, both men silent as they witnessed history being made. Behind them, representatives from every era and culture gathered to see their new home for the first time. Little Star held Katie's hand tightly while her brother pressed his face against a viewport. The landing was smooth despite the ship's age and damage from battle. They touched down in the crater's center, and the settlement team immediately began work. Engineers from the Pathfinder worked alongside volunteers to set up the initial habitats. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would dig into the lunar surface, creating underground chambers protected from radiation and temperature extremes. The collector ship's technology would provide life support, water recycling, and crop growing systems. After the basics were established, the ship itself would be dismantled and its materials used to expand the colony. Katie spent the first week helping organize people and assign tasks. The colonists numbered over 13,000 now, including those rescued from Arcturus Prime. Such a large group needed structure and purpose to avoid chaos. Running Hawk worked with the Council of Representatives to create work teams based on skills rather than time periods. Romans who understood engineering were paired with pioneers who knew construction. Native American hunters taught food preservation to ancient Greeks. Medieval craftspeople shared metalworking techniques with Viking smiths. The barriers between eras continued breaking down as people discovered they needed each other. The children presented a special challenge and opportunity. There were over 2,000 young people in the colony, ranging from infants to teenagers. Running Hawk insisted that all children receive education regardless of background or era. Katie helped establish schools where volunteers taught reading, writing, mathematics, and practical skills. The children adapted faster than adults, learning multiple languages and making friends across cultural boundaries. Little Star became friends with a Roman girl and a medieval boy, playing games that mixed their different traditions. Watching them gave Katie hope for the colony's future. After 2 months of hard work, the basic settlement was complete. They had carved extensive chambers into the lunar rock, creating living spaces, farms, workshops, and community areas. The environmental systems worked perfectly, maintaining Earth-normal atmosphere and temperature. Water extracted from lunar ice was purified and recycled through systems that would function for decades. Hydroponic farms produced vegetables and grains, supplemented by meat from chickens and rabbits brought from the Pathfinder. The colony could sustain itself indefinitely with the technology provided. Captain Hayes called a final council meeting to address the most difficult question. What happened next? The Pathfinder would leave soon, taking Katie and the other crew members with it. The colonists would be completely alone, 2 million years from their origins with no way to call for help. Dr. Chen had programmed severe limitations into the technology they were leaving behind. The colonists would have tools to survive, but nothing that would let them advance too quickly. The goal was natural development across thousands of years, not instant civilization. Many colonists were frightened by this reality. They had relied on the Pathfinder crew for guidance and support. Now they would be truly independent. Running Hawk addressed the assembly in the main gathering chamber. He spoke slowly so translators could convert his words into dozens of languages. He reminded everyone why they chose this path. They were not refugees or victims anymore. They were founders building something that would last millennia. Their descendants would spread across the moon and eventually to Earth itself. Thousands of years in the future, their legacy would become part of humanity's story. But that future required sacrifice from them now. They would live hard lives building infrastructure their grandchildren might enjoy. They would face dangers and difficulties without advanced technology to save them. Some would die, but they would die as free people shaping their own destiny. The speech moved many to tears. Ruth, the pioneer woman, stood and said she had faced similar challenges on the American frontier. Building something from nothing was hard but gave life meaning. Gregory, the Union captain, agreed that sacrifice for future generations was the highest calling. Even the Roman centurion, who had initially opposed the colony plan, acknowledged that great civilizations were built on the backs of those who came before. The council voted unanimously to proceed. They would stay and build Firewalker's gift regardless of hardship. Katie met privately with Running Hawk the night before the Pathfinder was scheduled to leave. They sat in a small chamber that served as his office, surrounded by maps and plans for the colony's expansion. The Warchief looked tired but satisfied. He thanked Katie again for everything she had done, for saving the children, for helping free thousands of prisoners, for supporting the colony when others doubted. Katie tried to deflect the praise, but Running Hawk was insistent. He said she represented the best of what humanity could be: courage, compassion, and willingness to sacrifice for others. Those traits would be remembered in the colony's stories. Katie asked if Running Hawk was truly ready for the responsibility ahead. Leading 13,000 people from dozens of different cultures was an enormous task. He would face conflicts, shortages, and disasters that would test him constantly. Running Hawk smiled and said he had been preparing his whole life without knowing it. As a warchief, he led warriors into battle knowing many would die. As a captive, he learned patience and adaptation. As a survivor, he discovered that hope could exist even in darkness. He was ready. Katie believed him. She had watched him grow from a confused refugee to a leader people trusted with their lives. The next morning brought the formal handover ceremony. Captain Hayes officially transferred control of the settlement to the Colonial Council, with Running Hawk serving as chief executive. The Pathfinder crew gathered to say goodbye to people they had come to know and respect. Maria hugged warriors she had trained, her tough exterior cracking as she wished them well. Dr. Chen gave final instructions on maintaining the technology they were leaving behind. Captain Hayes shook hands with Running Hawk and called him a true leader. Katie saved her goodbyes for last. Little Star and Swift Fox clung to Katie, begging her not to leave. The girl cried that Katie was family now, that she couldn't go away. Katie knelt and held both children close, her own tears flowing freely. She explained that she had to return to her own time but would never forget them. She made them promise to be brave and help build the colony into something wonderful. The boy tried to be strong, but his voice shook when he asked if they would ever see Katie again. She couldn't lie to them. The answer was no, but she told them that she would carry memories of them always, across millions of years and uncountable stars. Running Hawk walked Katie to the Pathfinder's shuttle. They stood together looking up at Earth hanging in the sky. The Warchief spoke quietly about how strange it was that he understood more now than he ever had in his first life. He had been a warrior focused on battles and honor. Now he saw the bigger picture of human history stretching across time. Katie said he had become what every leader should be, someone who thought beyond their own lifetime. Running Hawk laughed and said Katie should take her own advice. She was returning to a time where people needed her example too. They performed a traditional Apache farewell ritual, each placing their hand over their heart, then extending it to the other. Running Hawk added something not traditional. He gave Katie a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Inside was a journal he had written documenting the colony's establishment. He wanted someone in the future to know their story, to understand what 13,000 displaced souls had chosen to do. Katie promised to keep it safe, to make sure their legacy was remembered. They embraced briefly, and Running Hawk turned away quickly, his shoulders rigid with controlled emotion. The Pathfinder's shuttle lifted off from the lunar surface, leaving the colony behind. Katie watched through the viewport as the settlement grew smaller and finally vanished. She clutched Running Hawk's journal to her chest and felt the weight of history in her hands. Somewhere below, in chambers carved from lunar rock, 13,000 people were beginning the hard work of building a civilization that would last 2 million years. They would succeed or fail based on their own courage and determination. Katie Morrison stood in her small apartment on Earth, 6 months after returning from the mission. The walls were covered with maps and photographs from the colony's establishment. Her desk held Running Hawk's journal, its deerskin cover worn from repeated reading. She had spent countless nights going through his careful handwriting, learning about the colony's first months through his eyes. The Warchief wrote with surprising eloquence, describing both practical challenges and philosophical reflections. His final entry, written the day before the Pathfinder left, spoke about hope being humanity's greatest strength. The journal entries revealed details Katie hadn't known. Running Hawk wrote about the Council's decision to create a new language that combined elements from all the represented cultures. He described how children were learning this shared tongue, while also keeping their ancestral languages alive. He documented the first harvest from the hydroponic farms and the celebration that followed. He wrote about disputes between groups and how the Council resolved them through patience and compromise. Most movingly, he wrote about the children, especially Little Star and Swift Fox, who had become symbols of the colony's future. Katie had been approached by several academic institutions wanting to study the rescue mission and colony establishment. She declined most requests, knowing the true story had to remain classified. Instead, she wrote carefully edited papers about xenoanthropology and first contact protocols, drawing on her experiences without revealing specifics. Her work gained recognition in scientific circles. She became known as an expert on cultural integration and displaced persons, though no one knew the real source of her expertise. The irony wasn't lost on her. Captain Hayes contacted Katie one morning with unexpected news. A deep space probe had detected unusual energy signatures on the moon, matching collector technology. The readings were faint and ancient, exactly what you would expect from equipment used 2 million years ago, then abandoned. Hayes thought it might be proof that the colony had existed and potentially succeeded. Katie felt her heart race. The timeline was stable, so the colony must have survived. But having physical evidence made it real in a new way. She requested permission to join the investigation team, and Hayes approved immediately. The mission to the moon took 2 weeks to organize. Katie joined a small team including Dr. Chen and Lieutenant Maria Santos, both eager to see if traces of the colony remained. They took a research shuttle to the specific crater where the settlement had been established. The lunar surface looked unchanged, marked by the same ancient craters Katie remembered from 2 million years ago. But sensors detected anomalies beneath the surface in the exact location where the colony's chambers had been carved. They suited up and descended into a natural cave system that led toward the anomalies. The caves looked untouched by time, gray rock formations that could have existed forever. Then they found the first artifact, a metal door corroded and half buried in lunar dust. The design was clearly derived from collector technology, but modified with human craftsmanship. Katie's hands shook as she brushed dust away from symbols carved into the metal. They were words in the hybrid language Running Hawk had mentioned creating. Dr. Chen's translator worked slowly to decipher them. The words read, "Firewalker's gift founded in hope." Beyond the door, they found the remains of the colony. The chambers had collapsed over millions of years, but bones of the settlement remained. Environmental systems long dead, farming equipment turned to rust, living quarters filled with dust. They moved carefully through the ruins, documenting everything with scanners and cameras. Katie felt like an archaeologist discovering an ancient civilization, which was exactly what this was. In one chamber, they found something that made her cry. Children's drawings carved into the wall, simple stick figures and animals that could have been made by any child throughout history. Little Star and Swift Fox might have made these marks. Dr. Chen made the most significant discovery in what appeared to be a storage room. Containers sealed with advanced materials had survived the millennia. Inside were artifacts from the colony's early days. Tools showing both primitive and advanced construction techniques. clothing that mixed styles from different eras, pottery decorated with symbols from multiple cultures, books written in the hybrid language, their pages preserved through careful storage. These were treasures beyond price, physical proof that the colony had thrived. Katie held a small carved figure of a woman surrounded by flames and knew it represented her. The colonists had remembered. Maria found evidence that the colony had expanded far beyond the original chambers. Tunnels led in multiple directions, suggesting a much larger settlement than they initially established. Dr. Chen's analysis indicated the colony had survived for at least 10,000 years before being abandoned. He theorized the colonists eventually moved to Earth's surface as their technology advanced, and they could protect themselves from environmental hazards. Their descendants would have mixed with early humans, becoming part of humanity's natural development just as Running Hawk planned. The team spent 3 days cataloging everything they found. Katie worked with reverence, handling each artifact as the precious memorial it was. These objects connected her directly to people she had known and cared about. She imagined Running Hawk organizing work crews, Ruth teaching children to cook, Gregory leading security patrols. The colony had been real and successful. The displaced humans had built something lasting against all odds. Their courage and determination had created a legacy that survived 2 million years. On the final day of exploration, Katie found Running Hawk's personal chamber. It was larger than others, befitting a leader, but simply furnished. The most prominent feature was a wall covered in careful writing. The Warchief had carved updates into the stone over years, creating a permanent record. Katie read his words with Dr. Chen's translator. The entries spoke of births and deaths, of harvests and hardships, of conflicts resolved and friendships formed. Running Hawk wrote about watching Little Star and Swift Fox grow into leaders themselves. He wrote about the colony reaching population milestones and expanding into new chambers. His final entry, carved in shaky letters suggesting old age or illness, thanked the Star Woman one last time for giving them the chance to be free. Katie touched the wall where Running Hawk's words were carved and felt connection across impossible distance. The Warchief had lived his entire remaining life building something greater than himself. He had seen children born who would never know Earth or the stars, who would think the lunar colony was their natural home. He had watched his people blend into a new culture that honored all their pasts while creating its own future. He died knowing the colony would continue long after he was gone. Katie couldn't imagine a more meaningful life. The team returned to Earth with their findings, and Captain Hayes immediately classified everything. The artifacts went into secure storage where they would remain for at least 1,000 years. Only a handful of people knew the truth about Firewalker's gift. Katie wrote a comprehensive report documenting everything they had found, including detailed translations of Running Hawk's wall writings. The report would be sealed until the time came for humanity to know its complete history. For now, the story remained a secret shared by those who had lived it. Katie requested a transfer to the xenoanthropology department, where she could continue studying cultural integration and first contact scenarios. Her experiences gave her unique insights into how different cultures could work together, despite vast differences. She published papers and taught classes, always careful to use hypothetical examples rather than revealing the truth. Her students learned about respect, patience, and the importance of giving people agency over their own lives. She shaped a generation of first contact specialists without them knowing she was teaching from personal experience. Years passed and Katie built a successful career based on lessons learned from Running Hawk and the colonists. She never married or had children, feeling that her family existed 2 million years in the past. On quiet nights she would read the journal again, remembering faces and voices that no one else alive had known. She kept the carved figure of the Firewalker on her desk, a private reminder of the children who had loved her and the warrior who had trusted her. Sometimes she wondered if genetic echoes of Little Star and Swift Fox existed in the modern world. Great to the power of thousands grandchildren who carried tiny fractions of their DNA. On the 20th anniversary of the mission, Captain Hayes organized a private memorial service for the original Pathfinder crew. They gathered at the Lunar Research Station overlooking the crater where the colony had been established. Katie stood with Maria, Dr. Chen, Hayes, and a dozen others who had participated in the rescue and colony founding. They didn't speak much, each lost in their own memories, but they raised glasses in a silent toast to 13,000 people who had chosen courage over comfort, who had built a civilization that survived millennia. Katie returned to Earth and finally felt ready to share part of the story. She wrote a novel using the colony's experiences but presenting it as fiction. The book told of displaced humans from different eras learning to work together and build something new. Critics praised